Hi, this is Adam Eliel Berkowitz from Israel 365 News. I am very merited to have a dear friend who I intend to get to know better. This is Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. He is the newly appointed executive director.
Correct, yeah.
Of the CJCUC, which is you can correct me if I get it wrong, the Center for Jewish Understanding.
It's the Center for Jewish Christian
Understanding.
Jewish/Christian, Jewish Christian Understanding and Cooperation.
Right. It's one of the more difficult acronyms I've run into. And I've been connected watching the CJCUC for many years. And I really want to take this opportunity to reacquaint you with this really amazing organization, something that's taken for granted today. I think they were the groundbreakers and really one of the big motivators behind it. And they've done a lot of very unique things. So I'd like to take this opportunity to reacquaint myself and you all with this great place. So Rabbi Wolicki, first of all, I'm so happy to welcome you back to the CJCUC. Tell us first, the acronym seems to say it, but what exactly is the organization?
Okay, it's an acronym that everyone has trouble with. The CJC, but it really is it's a statement. It's almost a slogan in and of itself. It's a statement of what the center actually is. It's a center for understanding and cooperation. And those are two aspects of what we do between Jews and Christians. The center was founded by Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, the chief rabbi of Efrat, who is a national figure, a worldwide figure in the Jewish community, one of the great leaders in the Jewish community, both in Israel and worldwide today. And he founded the CJCUC back in 2008. So it's about 13 years ago where he came up with the idea for CJCUC because the times that we live in, Rabbi Riskin is a great visionary, and he realized that the times that we live at a time where millions of Christians worldwide, and growing numbers every day, every year, are engaged in and interested in and feel connected to the Jewish people and the state of Israel and the biblical story that has been unfolding in our time, the long-awaited mass return of the people of Israel after a lengthy exile. And Christians are so engaged in this, and Christians for many years have supported causes in Israel financially, and they come to Israel to visit on pilgrimage trips, and they politically support Israel. And yet, from the Jewish community, from the Orthodox Jewish community in Israel, from the rabbinic Jewish community, there had never really been an institutional response. There were certainly Jewish organizations that were more than happy to accept the financial assistance or political assistance of the Christian community, but there had never been an institution established to really welcome this dialogue, to reach a hand across the aisle in the other direction and say, let's build a relationship, beyond politics and beyond philanthropy. The CJCUC does not raise money for this or that particular cause. I have nothing against people who raise money from Christian supporters of Israel. It's one of the important components of the relationship. One of the main ways that Christians become a part of this great move of God, of the modern state of Israel, is by financially supporting it and helping build it. And that's biblically mandated and biblically foretold that they would be a part of it in that way. So nothing against people who do that. And the same thing goes for the political activity. The strength of Israel's political stance, especially in the United States, but in the Western world in general, is underpinned in large part by these millions of Christians who are supportive of us.
If I can interject for a moment, what you're saying is really astounding, because let's go back even 15 years. there were very few ways for Christians and Jews to connect, and very, very few ways for us to connect institutionally. I was merited to speak with Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein before he passed away, and he actually told me that the reason why he started collecting money to support Israel from the Christians was because he couldn't see any other way to connect to them, and he wanted to make that bridge. That's why he called it the fellowship. And it seems like now that there are so many ways for Jews and Christians to connect that it's almost, you can't say, oh, I can't find a way to connect. It's you
Right.
have to find, you can find your specific way to connect, which is really it's glorious.
It's astounding.
Yeah,
It's astounding. You know, I'll tell you, you know, just to see how far things have changed, how quickly. I've been involved, you know, personally. I've had interaction with and involvement with Christian Zionists for a long time. In terms of the history of Christian Zionism and history of this relationship, it's actually, you know, almost considered prehistoric. Back in the early 90s, in 1993, 94, that time period, 94, 95, I lived in Jerusalem, and I was the executive director at the time of the International Coalition for Missing Israeli Soldiers. I worked with the families of Israeli MIAs to raise awareness and raise political awareness about their cause. This was also at the time of the beginning of the Oslo negotiations with Israel, the US, and the PLO. And the families of Israeli MIAs saw this as an opportunity to raise their issue. And that's what I was doing at the time. And we were looking for allies, looking for people who would help us. And at the time, we were approached by a few Christian Zionist organizations who wanted to get involved with our work because they had seen our ads and our events. And I was very wary as an Orthodox Jew. This is before Christians United for Israel existed. There was no, all the things that exist today. Nowadays, if a Christian wants to study from rabbis, there's not only does the internet afford them the opportunity, but the internet affords them opportunities that are tailor-made for Christians. And there are numerous Jewish scholars who travel around, as I do, and visit churches and speak to Christian groups. There's a lot more cross-pollination, as you said, but at the time there was virtually none. There was political support, but it barely went, and there was the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews raising money, but it didn't really go beyond that. And I went to Washington, D.C. in 1995 for the first ever gathering of all the Christian Zionist organizations who were going to meet in Washington, D.C. and start, doing some lobbying. This is before Christians United for Israel. And the entire convention was about 100, 150 people. It was.
I have a feeling if you held it today, Washington, D.C. wouldn't be big enough.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you can have single organizations will have hundreds or thousands of people at their conventions. It's a different world. So the importance of the relationship with Christians has been something that's been a part of the way I think, part of my my worldview for a very, very long time. And seeing it develop has just been, it's just been astounding for people who are familiar with the whole world of Jewish Christian relations. Like when you go all the way back to that time, there was something called the Christian Israel Public Affairs Committee, a kind of Christian AIPAC they were at this conference, and John Garr, if you know of John Garr, great Christian scholar of Jewish roots of Christianity, was there, and all these, and it was a tiny little movement. And you fast forward to today, and as you said, it's massive. So CJCUC's role, though, still remains somewhat unique in that CJCUC is part of, meaning it's actually a subsidiary organization in a larger network of Jewish educational and rabbinic organizations that are part of Or Torah Stone. Or Torah Stone is this network. It has there's numerous schools, including a rabbinical school in Israel. There's a women's seminary. They send rabbis out. There are rabbis in communities all over the world who are emissaries of Or Torah Stone. Or Torah Stone is a major organization in the Jewish community, and especially represents hundreds of rabbis worldwide. And the fact that Or Torah Stone houses CJCUC, that CJCUC is actually an arm of Or Torah Stone. As executive director of CJCUC, I'm an employee of Or Torah Stone. The fact that we represent this mainstream Orthodox rabbinic organization is significant because in the world of Jewish-Christian relations, so much of what goes on the Jewish side, unfortunately, in much of the Jewish community is still seen as kind of out of the box and on the margins. And one of the main missions of CJCUC by its very existence is to bring the Jewish-Christian relationship more into mainstream acceptance within the Jewish community.
I think that's hugely important. I've heard a lot of Christians, very well-intentioned, who want to connect to Israel, and they feel a need to open this up to other Christians. But as a Jew living in Israel, as an Orthodox Jew, I just see how so many Jews shut the doors. They're not ready for this relationship. They're not willing. And it really, if we could open this up, the possibilities are really huge. In the language of my readers, this is redemption stuff.
Right, and it's not just that, it would be valuable to do it, but it's, if you think about, when I speak to Jewish audiences, what my focus when I speak to them, like when I speak in synagogues, and we're currently at CJCUC, I'm going to throw in some of the things we're actually working on. We're currently working on a curriculum about Jewish-Christian relations and about Christianity that will be implemented, God willing, in Jewish day schools, so that there will be a component of the curriculum where students will learn about modern Christianity and about the Christian support for Israel and what it is, and they'll also learn from a Jewish perspective how to view this through the lens of our theology in a healthy and productive way.
That's astounding. I don't think Christians understand this. I lived in America until I was 30 years old. I grew up in a regular suburb in New Jersey, but Jews outside of Christmas and Easter and maybe a few other things know nothing about Christianity. Right. It's know nothing about even the history of Christianity.
Well, they know. Unfortunately, the only history of Christianity they know is the history of persecution of Jews by the church, which is a dark part of our history, and it colors the relationship. It's interesting. Jews have something that is usually a strength, but in this context becomes a weakness, which is that Jews have a very strong historical consciousness, much more so than most people. It's something that I've come to recognize more and more the more I interact with people who aren't Jewish. So if something happened 500 years ago for Jews, that's not so long ago. 1,000 years ago is already pretty old. 2,000 years ago, okay, now we're talking. Now that's old already. We have a very broad historical consciousness, so much so that, and you've probably experienced this too, when you talk to Jews about about positive relationships with Christians, very often Jews who are opposed will bring up things like the Spanish Inquisition and the Crusades. Now, the Crusades happened literally around 1,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the Spanish Inquisition was about over 500 years ago. We're talking about things that happened a very, very long time ago. But for Jews, this might as well have happened yesterday. For a Jew, if Jews were persecuted by Christians 500 years ago, then when they see a Christian today, they're saying that person was persecuting me 500 years ago, because Jews, we identify with the Jews of history, going back all the way to Sinai. We identify with the Jews of history very, 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 very powerfully. When we read the book of Esther on Purim and there's a Jewish victory, we feel very much that that's our victory. And most people in the world today don't feel that personal identification with people from the ancient world. Someone of Italian descent today doesn't, when they're reading the history of ancient Rome, doesn't really feel that they're reading their own personal history in the same way. and I'm not saying this, I'm not Italian, but I've spoken to people from many different backgrounds, and this is confirmed. So when you talk to Christians today and say, Jews are, and you tell them this, sometimes they'll laugh. I mean, they don't mean it in a bad way, but it just seems so, because to them, they don't see themselves as the extension of the Christians who persecuted Jews 1,000 years ago. But Jews see them that way. So
I also see that too many times the dialogues between Jews and Christians, at least from the side of the Jew, is trying to prove that the Christians are wrong. That's, I think, that's a paradigm that we're really stuck in.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of issues that need to be ironed out. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely.
But because CJCUC has this network, this rabbinic network, and it's one thing that I've put at the top of my list of priorities is to actually tap into that network in a more productive way. And we're going to be doing programming over the next year, and over the next years, we're going to start doing educational programming to educate rabbis at a local level. One of the things that we're going to be working on a case-by-case basis, but really aggressively, is connecting rabbis who are out in communities all over the world with local Christian leaders who we know, and shepherding those relationships so that there can be cooperation and positive interaction at the local level, so that it's not just coming from our office in Jerusalem or in Efrat, but that we're actually helping build cells of this relationship between faith leaders on the Christian side and Jewish side all over the place. So that's one area that we really are going to be working on.
So I hear these programs to educate Jews about Christianity, which I don't think people understand how necessary that is. Hope, and I understood with the hopes of opening up the doors to dialogue. What are you doing towards the Christians? Are you also doing education in that direction?
Oh, for sure. And look, there's a lot going on for Christians. As I said before, any Christian who's interested in Jewish teachings or the Jewish roots of Christianity, or just connecting with the Jewish people, as millions of Christians have become. And again, the political support, the financial support is all well known, and that's kind of the famous part of it. But Jews need to understand, and Christians do understand, that the political and financial support for Israel coming from Christians is not, it's not in itself a political position or just a philanthropic position. It's all coming from a theological, biblical faith place. So the political support for Israel, for example, is not really a political position. These Christians have a biblical worldview, and they're embracing the ingathering of the Jewish people to the land of Israel and the reconstitution of the Jewish nation because of their biblical mindset, and that the application of that is financial support or political support. But these Christians, for so long, were never engaged at the spiritual level within this relationship. So today you have wonderful organizations out there like Root Source and like Israel 365, that really put material out there and have a lot of engagement with Christians. And we do the same. CJCUC, before COVID, when we had tourists coming, was hosting over 100 groups a year of Christians, Christian pilgrims and we would do a Bible study with them. And we've done many Bible studies for Christians from a Jewish perspective over the years. But the one area that is not being addressed enough, that we intend to make a major focus of our work, is the world of Christian academia.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, I'll tell you what we're working on. A lot of people are aware of recent polling that shows that the younger generation of Christians are less inclined to be supportive of Israel than the earlier generation.
That is also a huge danger to the churches.
For sure, it's a danger. It's a danger to a lot of things. But I'll tell you my take on it. I've been building relationships with Christian college campuses and seminary campuses for a number of years. Back when I was the associate director of CJCUC, I began this endeavor. And during that time, I helped plan and lead CJCUC's first trip to Israel for Christian professors of Bible and theology. I've been a guest speaker on many Christian campuses. And in these last 2 years, since I left CJCUC 2 years ago, and I've been doing a lot of consulting work, working for the outreach department of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And shortly before Rabbi Eckstein died, he initiated a project to try to build deeper relationships with Christian college campuses, college and seminary campuses that I've been deeply involved with. And just, today's, we're recording this on Monday. On this past Friday, just a couple of days ago, I was in Toronto at an academic conference held at Canada Christian College, an evangelical college just outside of Toronto. And it was planned jointly by myself and the academic dean of the college, Dr. Michael Reardon. And we planned this conference together where we invited Christian scholars and Jewish scholars to come deliver papers, a good old boring academic conference on the topic of intersections between Jewish and Christian thought. And there were, I was one of 2 Jewish presenters there. And there was, it was a one-day conference, and then there were a number of Christian presenters there. And we're going to be publishing these papers, in an academic way, where we're going to be putting this stuff out in the academic world. We're engaging these professors, and all the papers dealt with different aspects of theology, points of difference, points of commonality, really engaging in dialogue. It was a fascinating conference. It was the first one of its kind, and we plan to do them on a regular basis. That's just an example. And what we've done is we've built these relationships with a number of different campuses. Because I've been working on this stuff with the fellowship, and now I was appointed executive director of CJCUC, what's probably going to be happening, what we're working on now, is a partnership between the fellowship and CJCUC through the work that I'm doing to expand this activity so that we're reaching more and more students and more of the Christian academics. And this is an area that has not really been developed. What I mean by that is that if you visit churches in America, evangelical churches, you'll find that many of them are pro-Israel. They have Israeli flags, and they're actively pro-Israel. They take trips to Israel, and even within those same denominations or same way, parts of the Christian world, if you go into the seminary campuses, you'll find that there's much less awareness of Israel. There's much less engagement with Israel on the campuses. They're not anti-Israel. People should not misunderstand these polling numbers. So when these polls came out showing that younger Christians are less pro-Israel, as someone who for the last 4 or 5 years has been traveling regularly to Christian seminary and college campuses and meeting with students and meeting with faculty and spending time on these campuses, my take on those numbers was a little different. A lot of people just said, oh, the younger people are more anti-Israel. I said, no. They're not anti-Israel. They're not anti-Israel. They're not pro-Israel. Israel's just not on their radar. They're just completely unaware of Israel. That's really what's going on.
I remember when I was reading about that particular issue, I believe it came out of a Pew research. One of the suggestions or theories was that it doesn't necessarily come out of an attitude towards Israel, but it comes out of an overall moving of their values by being affected by the overall liberal values.
Well,
with Israel getting wrapped up in that.
Well, I'll tell you. So that's a little bit of
which I think would be of great concern to the Christians themselves.
I've heard that as well. So look, things like this are complicated, and there could be multiple factors all playing into it. But let me just push back a little bit on that viewpoint. These same Christian students are not taking in liberal values when it comes to abortion. They're not taking in liberal values when it comes to gender. They're not voting for left-wing progressive parties. I mean, we're talking about young Christians, active Christians. And so it's not that they take all their values from the more liberal, media-driven left. However, when there is a value that they don't fully understand as a biblical value, then they might slide into taking their cues from the media and from the progressive liberal left, because they don't see it as a mandate of their faith, the way they do with things like abortion and marriage. So and when it comes to Israel, most of them can't pick it out on a map. It's not that they're knowledgeable of Israel and they're not so pro-Israel. They just don't know about it. So they're more ambivalent about it. So you don't see strong pro-Israel attitudes. But once these students are exposed to Israel, once they're educated about Israel, they become very passionate in their support. So what I think has happened over the years, since the Christian Zionist movement began, it really began as a church-driven movement. And one of the main drivers of it is the mass pilgrimages to Israel. Millions and millions of Christians visit Israel every year. And when you talk to Christians who visited Israel, you know that it completely transforms their view of Israel. It transforms their whole attitude.
Transforms Jews who come here, young Jews.
In many ways, I believe that a trip to Israel is actually more transformative for Christians than it is for Jews.
Could be.
I say that from experience. When I talk to Christians and I realize what happens to them when they visit Israel, it's transformative. Look, most Jews care about Israel even if they've never been here. It's not true of Christians. When they come to Israel, it flips a certain switch, and Israel can become a major passion in their lives. But trips to Israel cost money. Who doesn't have money? Students don't have money, and professors don't have money. The academics who teach at these Christian colleges are not paid well. They're not wealthy. These aren't Ivy League professors, getting large salaries. They generally just can't afford a trip to Israel. They're not, there's a lot more money in the churches than there is in the campuses. We realized early on when we started reaching out to these campuses that a lot of these professors who are teaching theology, they're teaching the Bible, they're teaching the New Testament, which almost entirely took place in Israel, and they've never been here before. So engaging the younger generation on the campuses is of critical importance. Now, because the Christian Zionist movement really was built on those two pillars, philanthropy and political support, which was connected to the third, which is the pilgrimages, all of those three things are much more coming from churches.
You're answering a question that has been bugging me ever since I started writing about this connection with Christians. When I was growing up in America, the wonderful liberal Jewish synagogue thing to do was interfaith. And so when I started connecting with Christians now, I thought I'd be doing interfaith. And
not interfaith.
It's absolutely, and I think you are emphasizing the major difference is Israel, that liberal Judaism historically, going back to what we call the Haskalah movement, sanitized Israel out of Judaism in order to assimilate and become, and to stop being the stranger in the strange land. So they got rid of Israel and they said, we're German, we're wherever we happen to be. We do not have another nationality. And so the interfaith movement in America coming out of that was very much, we're all the same, let's get together. And you keep emphasizing Israel, Israel, Israel. And what you're saying is the connecting factor, the bridge that connects Jews to Christians, which is based in the Bible, is Israel. And that's what can bring us together.
For sure. It's Israel. It's not just Israel. It's also the Bible. It's scripture. It's the fact that we share this text and we share the God of this text, the God of the Bible. And that's something that there's a lot to build on there. So our emphasis, just at a practical level, our emphasis is very much going to be, again, one of the major prongs is going to be focusing on the Jewish community, getting rabbis at the local level worldwide more educated about Christians, more understanding of the relationship, and where possible, to actually foster relationships at a local level between faith leaders, between Jewish and Christian faith leaders. At the same time, bringing more, educating the Jewish community, getting into the schools, and also, and for the Christian side, having a greater focus on Christian academia, because this is very needed. Again, there's a lot of political support, a lot of financial support for Israel, but you go into the on the campuses and you don't see it as much, and that's dangerous, because the next generation of Christian leaders, the pastors who are going to be pastoring churches 10 years from now, 20 years from now, or even now, a lot of young pastors are coming out of these seminaries, and Israel is just not part of it's not part of what they've been taught. Anyone who's deeply involved with Christian Zionism knows that for the most part, it's an older community. The activists in the Christian Zionist community tend to skew a little older, and we need to really work on that younger generation, but also to give it some intellectual heft. But by getting academics, getting the professors involved in the relationship and building relationships at that level, it also means that we're going to be affecting how Israel is talked about, how the Jewish people are talked about, how the Jewish roots of Christianity are talked about in the classroom, in the seminaries.
It's interesting you're emphasizing the academia, the people who are more theologically savvy. My experience has been that also in Judaism and also in Christianity, there are people who are quite devout, but their devotion is not based in solid theology, in the sources, in the theology of whatever religion they come from. So I've encountered some real difficulty from the non-academic, non-theologically savvy Christians, and at the same time, most of the opposition or the Jewish resistance to connecting with Christians come from Jews who are quite devout, but aren't familiar enough with the sources to move out of what they learned just from being religious at home. You need that savvy, you need that solid base. You need to be swimming in the sources and in the theology to step into these strange new waters. That's my impression.
Yeah, look, listen, there's also another issue that I'm trying to address here, which is, let me see how I can put this. Both in the Jewish community and in the Christian community, there is a great respect for the ideas that come from leading academics, leading scholars, let's call it. In the Jewish community, we don't usually refer to our scholars as academics, but meaning to leading scholars. So, for example, your average Christian going to church is listening to what their pastor is saying, but there's a lot of more intellectually inclined Christians who are going to look at the latest books of theology coming out, or what the professors at the major Christian colleges are saying, or the young pastor who studied at a seminary and took theology and scholarship seriously. When they then come to a church and the church has an Israeli flag, and the elderly pastor who's retiring is very pro-Israel, but he thinks back to his professors in seminary who weren't so into this stuff, there's a tendency, again, this happens in the Jewish community also, to look at this whole connection between whether it's Christian Zionism or from the Jewish perspective, the whole idea, the importance of connecting Jews and Christians at this time in history. They view it as something that doesn't have an intellectual basis that's sound, a theological basis that's sound. It seems to a lot of people to be very shallow.
Seems like a
And it's not
fad.
shallow. And what I would like, my goal, like with, let's say, publishing the papers from a conference like we had on Friday, and trying to get more academics involved in these relationships, and building more ongoing relationships with Christian campuses, and going there to speak. And again, these relationships, hopefully they will bear fruit, that we will also start seeing a kind of producing substantive thought in print that supports this relationship.
That's great. I think we've actually got a lot for our people to chew on.
Okay.
And that this is about how long we can go maxing out on people.
So let me just add one more thing in here.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to share two more points for anyone who's listening, watching. Number one, I travel to the United States multiple times a year, usually about 8 or 9 times a year, meaning I go almost every month, which isn't a month filled with Christian holidays or a month filled with Jewish holidays. Other than that, I'll go about once a month, usually for about a week and a half at a time.
Wow.
And the goal is to actually engage people at the local level. So if there's anyone who's listening or watching this who would like to have me come to their church or to their campus, or to connect with them at the local level, please reach out to me. My contact information is
I'll post it. I'll post it.
It'll be posted. And the second thing is that we're also going to be starting a new endeavor at CJCUC, which is a weekly podcast, which is me and a pastor, a good friend of mine, Pastor Doug Reed from Youngstown, Ohio. And every week, we already started it. We launched it a few weeks ago, where we every week we have a guest who joins us to discuss an issue of shared concern for all people of faith. And it's called Shoulder to Shoulder. You could find it on any podcast platform where you find your podcasts. So look for that, and you could connect with us more. And it's going to be a weekly podcast, and we're going to be putting out more and more electronic content, short videos and podcasts in the coming months.
Fantastic. I was going to emphasize that you are a conduit, a lens to focus the light in both directions. And therefore people have this urge and desire to connect with Israel as part of the devotion. You would be a great place to start. You would definitely be able to give people a little more direction and a little more of an idea about what there is and what they can be looking for. So Rabbi Pesach, I can't thank you enough. This was an amazing talk. I look forward to having many more talks with you.
We can do this as often as you like.
I am so into it.
We can make it a regular thing.
I have to explain to people, I have enormous respect for Rabbi Pesach. He's a scholar, and he hides it very well. As much as he seems brilliant, he's even more brilliant than that. And he has given me wonderful direction, given in the most caring way.
Thank you.
This is an unprecedented connection between Jews and Christians, and it can be a little intimidating. So it's nice to have nice people to be able to make this connection. So I'd like to thank everyone, and hopefully we'll be hearing a lot more about Rabbi Pesach and his endeavors.
God